Kethavar pressed his four-fingered hand against the cool metal of the observation window and watched the small ship approach. The vessel looked strange compared to the smooth curves of Galactic Council ships. This human craft had hard edges and sharp angles, like someone had built it for purpose rather than beauty. His supervisor had told him this was an important day. First contact with a new species always was. The Vraxian stretched his long neck and adjusted his recording device. As a diplomatic observer for the Council, he had witnessed 12 first contacts in his career. Most went the same way. New species appeared nervous, sometimes hostile, always confused by the size and complexity of galactic civilization. The Idor humans seemed different already. Captain Jake Morrison stepped through the airlock with confidence that surprised Kethavar. Most new species moved carefully in Council ships, overwhelmed by technology they did not understand. Morrison walked like he belonged here. His uniform was simple but clean, and his eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the docking bay. Behind Morrison came three other humans. Lieutenant Lisa Carter carried what looked like scientific equipment, her face bright with excitement. A tall man named Ben Parker wore the same uniform as Morrison, but carried himself like a soldier. The fourth human, Dr. Helen Brooks, seemed older and calmer than the others. Kethavar activated his translation device and followed the group to the meeting chamber. The Council representatives were already waiting. Ambassador Zenth of the Kethran spoke first, welcoming the humans with the traditional greeting of peace. Morrison responded in what the translator called English, thanking them for the meeting. The formal introductions took an hour. Kethavar made notes about human behavior patterns. They maintained eye contact more than most species. They smiled frequently, showing their teeth in what appeared to be a friendly gesture rather than a threat display. Most interesting, they asked as many questions as they answered. Lieutenant Carter practically bounced in her seat when Ambassador Zenth offered to share scientific knowledge. She pulled out a small device and began showing holographic displays of human achievements. Kethavar watched the other Council members lean forward with interest as Carter explained human medicine, engineering, and space travel. The humans had developed faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago, which made their technological level impressive for such a young spacefaring civilization. Their ships used a different drive system than most Council species, something they called a quantum tunnel drive. Dr. Brooks explained the theory behind it with enthusiasm that made even the usually reserved Kethran scientists ask follow-up questions. Morrison answered questions about human government and society with practiced ease. He described a species that had learned to work together despite differences in culture and biology. The humans had apparently solved most of their major conflicts through something they called the Global Cooperation Treaty. When asked about their history, Morrison mentioned periods of disagreement but emphasized how humans had grown beyond such problems. Kethavar noticed something odd when the topic of human history came up. The humans became slightly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and glancing at each other. Lieutenant Carter pulled up historical files that showed remarkable technological progress, art, literature, and scientific advancement. But there were gaps in the timeline, periods marked simply as transitional eras without much detail. Ambassador Zenth asked about these gaps directly. Morrison explained that humans preferred to focus on their achievements rather than their mistakes. He said his species had gone through difficult periods while learning to cooperate, but had moved beyond such primitive behavior. Dr. Brooks added that modern humans found their ancestors' conflicts embarrassing and preferred not to dwell on them. The Council representatives seemed satisfied with this explanation. Many species had troubled pasts before joining galactic civilization. The important thing was that humans had obviously evolved beyond their primitive phase and now embraced peace and cooperation. Ben Parker spoke little during the formal meeting, but Kethavar noticed him watching everything carefully. When asked about his role, Morrison explained that Parker handled security and logistics for their mission. Parker smiled and said his job was mostly making sure everyone stayed safe and comfortable during the journey. He seemed friendly enough, but something about the way he observed the room reminded Kethavar of a predator studying its environment. The meeting continued with discussions of trade possibilities and cultural exchange. The humans showed genuine interest in learning about other species and seemed eager to contribute to galactic civilization. Carter practically vibrated with excitement when offered the chance to study in council research facilities. Dr. Brooks requested access to medical databases, saying human doctors could learn much from species with different biological systems. As the day progressed, Kethavar found himself impressed by these newcomers. Humans seemed naturally curious and collaborative. They laughed easily and showed genuine warmth toward the various alien species they met. Unlike some new members who joined the council out of necessity or fear, humans appeared to genuinely want to be part of the galactic community. The formal first contact concluded with an invitation for humanity to establish an embassy on Haven's Rest, the council's neutral diplomatic station. Morrison accepted immediately, saying his government would be honored to open formal relations. The humans would send a permanent delegation within 3 months. As the meeting ended, and farewells were exchanged, Kethavar gathered his notes and prepared his initial report. The humans seemed ideal candidates for council membership. They were intelligent, peaceful, technologically advanced, and genuinely interested in cooperation with other species. Their reluctance to discuss their violent past was understandable, and actually spoke well of their moral development. Kethavar requested assignment as cultural liaison to the human embassy. His supervisor approved the request easily, knowing Kethavar's reputation for thorough observation and accurate reporting. The Vraxian looked forward to studying these fascinating newcomers more closely. Walking back to his quarters, Kethavar reflected on the day's events. Humans reminded him of the Kethron in some ways, but with more energy and enthusiasm. They seemed to approach everything with optimism and curiosity. Their embarrassment about their primitive past was actually charming, showing how far they had progressed as a civilization. The only thing that puzzled him was Ben Parker's behavior. The human security officer had been polite and professional, but something about him felt different from the others. Kethavar could not identify what exactly bothered him about Parker. Just a feeling that the human was constantly alert in a way that seemed unnecessary for a peaceful diplomatic mission. Kethavar dismissed the thought as he prepared his preliminary report. Every species had individuals who were more cautious than others. Parker was probably just being thorough in his duties. The important thing was that humanity as a whole seemed ready to join the peaceful community of the galaxy. 3 months passed quickly on Haven's Rest station, and Kethavar had settled into a comfortable routine with the human embassy staff. Ambassador Mary Johnson ran the embassy with smooth efficiency that impressed even the demanding Kethran administrators. Her team included Dr. Alex Turner as Chief Science Officer, Commander Rick Davis as Security Chief, and Cultural Attaché Susan Phillips. The humans had become popular throughout the station in ways that surprised everyone. Dr. Turner spent his days working with alien researchers on medical projects, bringing fresh perspectives to problems that had puzzled council scientists for years. His approach to xenobiology was both methodical and creative, finding solutions that others had missed. The Helix researchers particularly enjoyed working with him because he asked questions that challenged their assumptions. Commander Davis had quietly become the most requested security consultant on the station. Various species brought him their disputes and problems, drawn by his calm manner and practical solutions. He had a gift for helping beings work through their differences without anyone losing face. Davis called it conflict resolution, and his success rate was remarkable. Susan Phillips organized cultural events that drew crowds from every species on the station. Her presentations about human art, music, and literature were always packed. She had a talent for explaining human concepts in ways that other species could understand and appreciate. The monthly human movie nights had become so popular that they needed to reserve the largest conference room. Kethavar found himself genuinely enjoying his assignment. The humans were endlessly fascinating to observe and document. They formed friendships quickly with other species and seemed to have unlimited energy for learning about alien cultures. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and even the normally reserved Vraxian found himself looking forward to his daily meetings with the embassy staff. Ambassador Johnson often invited Kethvar for informal meals where they discussed everything from philosophy to engineering. The human perspective on galactic civilization was refreshing and optimistic. Johnson spoke about her species' excitement at discovering they were not alone in the universe and their eagerness to contribute to the greater galactic community. During one such conversation, Kethvar brought up the historical gaps he had noticed. During first contact, Johnson explained that humans had what she called a troubled adolescence as a species, but had matured beyond such primitive behavior. She compared it to how individual humans often felt embarrassed about things they did as children, except on a species-wide scale. Johnson described how humans had learned to channel their competitive instincts into positive activities like sports, scientific research, and artistic achievement. She said warfare was simply something her species had outgrown through education and cultural evolution, like how they had outgrown many other primitive practices. Modern humans found the concept of organized violence as outdated as believing the world was flat. Dr. Turner joined these conversations sometimes, explaining how human psychology had evolved to favor cooperation over conflict. He described studies showing how modern humans were naturally inclined toward peaceful problem-solving and group harmony. The aggressive tendencies that might have helped their ancestors survive in primitive conditions had been largely eliminated through social progress. Kethvar found these explanations satisfying, though he occasionally noticed odd word choices in casual human conversation. Commander Davis sometimes referred to tactical approaches when discussing routine security procedures. Dr. Turner mentioned triage protocols with an intensity that seemed unusual for standard medical care. Susan Phillips used phrases like intelligence gathering when talking about her cultural research. When Kethvar asked about these terms, the humans always provided reasonable explanations. Davis explained that tactical thinking simply meant being systematic and thorough. Turner said triage was just medical prioritization. Phillips laughed and said intelligence gathering was her dramatic way of describing cultural research. Their explanations made sense, but something about their reactions suggested these words meant more to them than they were saying. The humans also had interesting reactions to certain types of entertainment. They gravitated toward competitive games and strategic puzzles with enthusiasm that seemed deeper than simple enjoyment. Commander Davis could beat most beings at strategy games with ease, claiming he just had good pattern recognition. The humans were also surprisingly knowledgeable about military history from various species, which they explained as academic interest in how civilizations had evolved beyond conflict. Everything changed when news arrived that the hegemony had declared war on the Galactic Council. The aggressive alliance of militaristic species had been growing bolder for years, but few expected them to actually attack. Their first strike devastated 3 outer colonies and destroyed 2 council defense fleets before anyone could react. Kethvar watched the alien council members struggle with panic and confusion. Species that had known peace for centuries had no idea how to respond to organized aggression. The Kethran military commanders admitted privately that their forces were designed for exploration and peacekeeping, not actual warfare. Admiral Zorith confessed that he had never fought in a real battle and did not know where to begin. The humans' reaction to the war news was subtle, but unmistakable to Kethvar's trained observer eye. Where other species showed fear or confusion, the humans displayed something that looked almost like recognition. Ambassador Johnson called an emergency staff meeting immediately, and Kethvar noticed their body language change completely. The casual friendliness remained, but underneath it was something harder and more focused. Commander Davis stopped using his usual relaxed posture and moved with precise efficiency. Dr. Turner's scientific curiosity took on a sharper edge as he requested detailed information about hegemony biology and technology. Susan Phillips began what she called research into hegemony culture and psychology, with intensity that went far beyond academic interest. Most disturbing to Kethvar was the moment when Admiral Zorith briefed the embassy staff on the military situation. As Zorith described the devastating effectiveness of hegemony attacks and the Council's inability to respond, Kethvar saw something flicker in the human's eyes. For just an instant, They looked less like peaceful diplomats and more like something he could not quite identify. Ambassador Johnson requested a private meeting with council leadership, saying humanity wanted to offer assistance in these difficult times. When Kethavar asked what kind of help a young species could provide against the mighty hegemony, Johnson smiled in a way that did not reach her eyes. That evening, Kethavar sat in his quarters, reviewing his observations, and feeling increasingly uneasy. The humans had done nothing wrong or threatening, but something fundamental had shifted in their behavior since the war began. They moved differently, spoke differently, and looked at everything with new eyes that seemed to see things others missed. He pulled up the historical files the humans had provided during first contact and studied the gaps more carefully. The timeline showed periods of remarkable progress interrupted by mysterious transitional eras that were barely documented. When he cross-referenced these gaps with what little information was available, he found references to something called global conflicts and military innovations that had been quickly glossed over. Kethavar made a note to research human history more thoroughly, but deep in his gut, he had the growing suspicion that he was about to learn something about his new friends that would change everything. The humans were still friendly and helpful, but now their friendliness felt like a choice, rather than their natural state. And that distinction, he was beginning to realize, might be the most important thing of all. The hegemony's second wave of attacks came faster and harder than anyone expected. 6 more colonies fell in as many days, and the Council's remaining defense fleets scattered in confusion. Species that had enjoyed peace for generations found themselves facing an enemy that fought with ruthless efficiency and seemed to enjoy causing destruction. Kethavar watched the emergency council session from the observer gallery, taking notes on how different species reacted to the crisis. The Kethran representatives spoke in hushed tones about evacuation procedures. The peaceful Helixians suggested attempting diplomatic contact with the hegemony leadership. Even the usually confident Zenthi seemed lost and uncertain about how to respond to such organized aggression. Ambassador Johnson entered the chamber wearing clothes Kethavar had never seen before. Gone was her usual flowing diplomatic attire, replaced by a dark practical uniform that seemed designed for function rather than appearance. Her entire staff wore similar outfits, and Kethavar noticed they moved with new purpose and coordination. Johnson requested permission to address the council, and her voice carried authority that had not been there before. She spoke clearly and calmly while describing humanity's offer to assist with the current crisis. The council members listened politely but with obvious confusion about what help such a young species could possibly provide. That was when Johnson said something that made Kethavar's blood run cold. She explained that humanity had not been entirely honest about their past, and that their claim to have evolved beyond warfare needed clarification. The humans had not forgotten how to fight, she said. They had simply learned when not to fight. Johnson activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with images Kethavar could barely comprehend. Human history unfolded before them in a parade of organized violence that spanned thousands of years. Massive armies clashed across continents while weapons of incredible destructive power turned cities to ash. The humans had spent their entire development as a species perfecting the art of warfare. Dr. Turner stood and began explaining human military development with the same enthusiasm he usually reserved for medical research. He described how human biology had evolved for persistence, hunting and group coordination, making them natural soldiers. Their social structures had developed around concepts of hierarchy, loyalty, and sacrifice that were perfectly suited for organized conflict. Commander Davis took over the presentation to discuss human tactical thinking. He explained that humans did not simply fight, they studied warfare like a science. Every conflict taught them new lessons about strategy, logistics, and psychology. Over thousands of years, they had developed approaches to combat that treated battle as both art and engineering. The holographic display showed human weapons development from simple tools to devices that could destroy entire planets. Susan Phillips explained that human creativity was not limited to peaceful pursuits. When applied to warfare, human imagination had produced innovations that consistently surprised and overwhelmed their enemies. Kethavar felt his understanding of humanity crumble as he watched the presentation. These beings he had come to think of as peaceful and friendly had spent 50,000 years learning how to kill each other with increasing efficiency. Every major advancement in human civilization had somehow been connected to warfare, from metallurgy to computers to space travel. Johnson addressed the obvious question about why humans had hidden this information during first contact. She explained that humanity had learned to control their warlike nature through careful social engineering and cultural development. They genuinely preferred peace to conflict, but this preference was a conscious choice rather than biological inability. The ambassador's next words sent chills through every being in the chamber. Humans had continued developing military technology and tactics even after achieving peace on their homeworld. They studied historical conflicts, ran war games, and maintained what they called defense readiness because they understood that the universe might not always be peaceful. Captain Morrison entered the chamber and was introduced as humanity's military advisor. Kethvar recognized him from the first contact meeting, but now Morrison carried himself like a completely different person. His casual friendliness had been replaced by cold professionalism that radiated competence and barely contained aggression. Morrison began outlining humanity's analysis of the current military situation with precision that terrified the council members. He had already studied hegemony tactics, identified their weaknesses, and developed preliminary strategies for defeating them. The human captain spoke about warfare like other beings discussed scientific research, with detailed knowledge and obvious expertise. The transformation of the humans was complete and shocking. Dr. Turner began analyzing hegemony biology to identify vulnerabilities. Commander Davis started discussing security protocols that were obviously designed for active combat, rather than peacekeeping. Susan Phillips revealed that her cultural research had actually been intelligence gathering about council species and capabilities. Kethvar realized that the humans had been conducting reconnaissance from the moment they arrived. Their friendship and cooperation had been genuine, but it had also served to gather detailed information about every species, every technology, and every potential advantage or weakness in council civilization. Johnson explained that humanity was offering to take command of the council's military response to the hegemony. The humans had experience with this type of conflict and understood how to fight against aggressive opponents. They promised to end the war quickly and with minimal casualties among council forces. The council members were horrified and fascinated, in equal measure. Admiral Zorith asked how humanity could be trusted with such authority when they had deliberately hidden their true nature. Morrison responded that humans understood the difference between enemies and allies, and that the council would benefit from human military expertise rather than suffer from it. Captain Morrison activated another display showing preliminary battle plans that took Kethvar's breath away. The human approach to warfare was sophisticated beyond anything the council had imagined. Morrison did not simply plan to fight the hegemony, he intended to dismantle their entire military structure through coordinated attacks on their logistics, communications, and command hierarchy. The humans had already identified key hegemony leaders, analyzed their psychological profiles, and developed strategies to exploit their personal weaknesses. They had studied hegemony ship designs and found critical flaws that could be exploited. Most impressive and terrifying, they had done all of this in the few days since the war began. Johnson assured the council that humanity had no territorial ambitions and would return to peaceful diplomatic relations once the crisis ended. The humans simply wanted to help their new friend survive against an enemy that threatened the peace they all valued. She emphasized that human military action would be precisely controlled and directed only against hostile forces. The council voted to accept human military assistance after less than an hour of debate. The alternative was watching galactic civilization collapse under hegemony aggression, and the humans offered the only realistic hope of survival. As the meeting ended and the humans began implementing their military plans, Kethvar sat in the empty chamber trying to process what he had witnessed. The friendly beings he had studied for months had revealed themselves to be the most sophisticated warriors in known galactic history. Their peaceful nature was not weakness but strength, under perfect control. Most disturbing was the realization that the humans were obviously holding back even now. The capabilities they had demonstrated were impressive, But Kethvar suspected they represented only a fraction of human military potential. These beings had spent their entire species development learning how to destroy their enemies. And now, they had volunteered to use that knowledge on behalf of the galaxy. Kethvar understood that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, truly professional warriors would fight on behalf of peaceful civilizations. The question was whether the galaxy would survive the cure as well as the disease. The transformation of Haven's rest station happened overnight. Ambassador Johnson converted the human embassy into what she called a command center, with multiple holographic displays showing real-time intelligence about hegemony movements, council, fleet positions, and strategic resources throughout the galaxy. The casual diplomatic atmosphere disappeared, replaced by focused military efficiency that made Kethvar's skin crawl. Susan Phillips revealed her true expertise when she began producing detailed psychological profiles of hegemony leadership. What Kethvar had assumed was cultural research had actually been intelligence analysis, and Phillips demonstrated knowledge of alien psychology that went far beyond academic study. She spoke about manipulating enemy decision-making with clinical precision that showed humans understood warfare as much more than simple violence. Dr. Turner established a biological warfare research unit that analyzed hegemony physiology for weaknesses while simultaneously developing countermeasures to protect council species. His medical knowledge translated seamlessly into understanding how to disable or kill enemy forces efficiently. Turner approached this work with the same enthusiasm he had shown for healing, revealing that humans viewed destruction and creation as different applications of the same scientific principles. Commander Davis began training volunteer council security forces in what he called enhanced defensive tactics. Kethvar observed one of these training sessions and felt sick watching peaceful beings learn human methods of killing. Davis taught them to move like predators, to think like hunters, and to strike without hesitation or mercy. The transformation of gentle council forces into effective soldiers happened with terrifying speed. Captain Morrison took command of the hastily assembled council fleet with authority that surprised even veteran military officers. Within hours, he had reorganized ship formations, established new communication protocols, and implemented tactical doctrines that bore no resemblance to traditional council military procedures. Morrison treated the fleet like a musical instrument he was tuning for a deadly symphony. The first engagement between the human-led council forces and the hegemony fleet demonstrated everything Kethvar had feared about human military capabilities. Morrison did not meet the enemy in direct combat as the hegemony expected. Instead, he used their own aggressive nature against them, drawing their forces into carefully prepared traps while striking at their supply lines and communication networks. Kethvar watched the battle from the command center, horrified by the calm professionalism with which the humans orchestrated destruction. Morrison coordinated the movements of dozens of ships while simultaneously analyzing enemy tactics and adjusting his strategy in real time. The human captain fought like someone who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. The hegemony forces, accustomed to overwhelming peaceful opponents through superior aggression, found themselves outmaneuvered and outfought by enemies who understood violence better than they did. Morrison's tactics were elegant and ruthless, turning hegemony strength into weakness while exploiting every flaw in their formations and psychology. Dr. Turner provided constant analysis of battle damage and casualty reports with the same clinical detachment he once applied to medical research. He tracked the effectiveness of different weapons against various hegemony species, while recommending tactical adjustments to maximize enemy losses and minimize council casualties. Turner discussed death and destruction like he was reviewing laboratory results. Commander Davis coordinated boarding actions against disabled hegemony vessels with smooth efficiency that revealed extensive experience with close-quarters combat. The humans had developed specialized equipment and techniques for fighting in the confined spaces of enemy ships, and Davis deployed these methods with deadly effectiveness against opponents who had never faced such sophisticated assault tactics. Susan Phillips managed what she called psychological operations, designed to demoralize hegemony forces and encourage surrender. She crafted propaganda broadcasts that exploited known weaknesses in enemy psychology, while simultaneously gathering intelligence from captured prisoners. Phillips treated enemy minds like puzzles to be solved rather than beings to be respected. What truly terrified Kethavar was the realization that the humans were enjoying themselves, not in a sadistic way, but with the deep satisfaction of professionals doing work they were born to perform. Their efficiency and creativity in applying violence was both impressive and horrifying, revealing that humans found warfare intellectually stimulating rather than emotionally disturbing. The humans began revealing military technologies that had somehow escaped mention during their diplomatic introduction. They produced weapons of elegant lethality that made hegemony equipment look primitive and clumsy. Human engineering had created devices specifically designed to kill efficiently while minimizing collateral damage, showing that they understood precision violence as well as overwhelming force. Morrison deployed strategies that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of logistics, psychology, and political science, in addition to pure military tactics. He did not simply defeat enemy forces. He systematically dismantled hegemony command structure by targeting key personnel, disrupting supply chains, and exploiting political tensions within the enemy alliance. The humans introduced concepts that were completely foreign to galactic warfare. They spoke about surgical strikes that eliminated specific targets without affecting surrounding areas. They implemented psychological operations that defeated enemies without firing a shot. Most disturbing, they developed strategic surrender protocols that convinced enemy forces to give up fighting by demonstrating the futility of continued resistance. Kethavar observed the human command staff during combat operations and realized they possessed knowledge and capabilities that went far beyond what they had demonstrated. These devastating displays of military prowess were carefully controlled examples, rather than full expressions of human potential. The humans were teaching by demonstration while holding back their true capabilities. Morrison explained his tactical decisions to council observers with patience that revealed his understanding of the educational value of the conflict. He was not simply winning a war, he was showing peaceful civilizations what warfare could become when conducted by beings who understood it as both science and art. The efficiency with which humans adapted to galactic warfare suggested they had studied council and hegemony military capabilities long before the conflict began. Their weapons were designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities in enemy technology. Their tactics accounted for known psychological weaknesses of various species, and their strategies demonstrated detailed knowledge of galactic political dynamics. Most chilling was the humans' obvious restraint. Kethavar could see that they possessed weapons and tactics that could end the war in days rather than months, but they chose to fight with measured force that achieved victory without causing unnecessary destruction. Their mercy was more terrifying than their violence because it demonstrated perfect control over power that could reshape the galaxy. As battle reports came in showing systematic destruction of hegemony forces, Kethavar began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans were not simply superior warriors. They were beings who had spent their entire evolutionary development learning how to wage war with mathematical precision and artistic beauty. The war was ending not through overwhelming force but through the application of superior understanding. Humans did not defeat the hegemony through greater violence. They defeated them through better violence applied with intelligence and creativity that turned every engagement into a lesson in the futility of aggression against truly professional warriors. Kethavar realized that galactic civilization would never be the same. Peace was no longer maintained through mutual weakness, but through the controlled strength of beings who could choose war or peace with equal facility. The humans had revealed that true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know exactly how much destruction was necessary and no more. The war ended exactly 6 months after it began, not with a climactic battle but with the systematic collapse of hegemony resistance. What the Council had expected to be a devastating conflict that might destroy galactic civilization became a methodical dismantling of enemy capability that left surviving hegemony forces confused and demoralized rather than simply defeated. Kethavar sat in his quarters, writing his final report while trying to process everything he had witnessed. The Humans had not simply won the war, they had rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic conflict. They introduced concepts like proportional response and strategic mercy that achieved victory while preserving the possibility of eventual peace with former enemies. Captain Morrison's final campaign against the hegemony homeworld demonstrated the true sophistication of human warfare. Rather than destroying the planet or slaughtering its population, Morrison used precisely targeted strikes to eliminate military leadership while leaving civilian infrastructure intact. The humans defeated their enemies so completely that surrender became the only rational choice. The hegemony's final transmission was a formal request for surrender terms, delivered by leaders who admitted they no longer understood what they were fighting against. Morrison's response was generous and practical, offering reconstruction aid in exchange for disarmament and participation in galactic peace processes. The humans treated defeated enemies as future allies rather than permanent threats. Ambassador Johnson had returned to her diplomatic persona, but Kethvar could no longer unsee what lay beneath the friendly smile and warm manner. The pleasant woman who organized cultural events and discussed philosophy over dinner was also someone who could coordinate the destruction of entire civilizations with casual efficiency. Her kindness was genuine, but optional. Dr. Turner resumed his medical research with alien colleagues, sharing his discoveries and contributing to galactic health initiatives with the same enthusiasm he had shown before the war. But Kethvar now knew that those hands which healed so skillfully could also kill with precision that made professional assassins look like amateurs. Turner's knowledge of biology worked equally well for creating life or ending it. Commander Davis returned to his security duties on Haven's Rest, helping resolve disputes and maintaining peace among the various species on the station. His calm manner and practical solutions were as effective as ever. But now Kethvar understood that Davis evaluated every being he met as a potential threat or asset. His peaceful demeanor concealed constant tactical awareness. Susan Phillips organized the same cultural events and educational presentations that had made her popular before the war. Her insights into alien psychology continued to fascinate audiences from different species, but Kethvar now recognized that she understood other beings well enough to manipulate or destroy them if necessary. Her friendship was sincere but strategic. Thayar. Galactic Council voted unanimously to grant humanity permanent membership with significant military authority, formally recognizing them as protectors of galactic peace. The humans accepted this responsibility with gracious humility, promising to use their capabilities only when necessary to maintain the stability they all valued. Kethvar knew this promise was genuine because he had observed how carefully the humans controlled their power during the war. They could have ended the conflict much faster and with greater destruction, but chose instead to use precisely the amount of force needed to achieve their objectives. Human restraint was more impressive than human capability. The most disturbing realization was that the humans genuinely preferred peace to war, but this preference came from strength rather than weakness. They chose cooperation because they understood the alternatives better than any other species in the galaxy. Their peaceful nature was not naivety, but wisdom earned through thousands of years of perfecting violence. In his final report, Kethvar wrote about the fundamental change in galactic civilization that humanity represented. Peace was no longer maintained through mutual weakness and the absence of conflict capability, but through the controlled strength of beings who could wage war with devastating efficiency, but chose not to do so. The humans had demonstrated that the most dangerous predators were not those who hunted constantly, but those who chose when to hunt and when to refrain. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their sophisticated military technology or their tactical brilliance, but their ability to switch between peace and war with perfect control and conscious choice. Kethvar included observations about human child development in his report after watching human families arrive at the station to join the permanent embassy staff. The children played with alien youngsters with the same warmth and curiosity their parents displayed, forming friendships across species barriers with ease that gave hope for the future of galactic civilization. But during competitive games, Kethvar saw flickers of the same calculating intelligence he had witnessed in their parents during the war. Human children learned cooperation and competition simultaneously, developing both the capacity for friendship and the skills needed for conflict. They were being raised to choose between peace and war, rather than simply defaulting to one or the other. The human educational system fascinated and terrified Kethvar as he observed it in operation. Human children learned history that included detailed studies of warfare, alongside lessons about cooperation and cultural achievement. They were taught to understand violence not as evil, but as a tool that could be used responsibly or irresponsibly, depending on circumstances and choice. Human parents spoke openly with their children about the recent war, explaining why it had been necessary to fight and why it was important to end the fighting as soon as objectives were achieved. The children asked intelligent questions about tactics and strategy, while also expressing concern for the well-being of former enemies. They were learning to think like warriors and diplomats simultaneously. Kethvar's final observation concerned the long-term implications of human membership in galactic civilization. Other species would inevitably try to learn human military techniques, but without the cultural development that taught humans when and how to apply such knowledge responsibly. The galaxy might become more violent or more peaceful depending on whether beings learned human wisdom along with human capabilities. The report concluded with Kethvar's assessment that humanity represented both the greatest opportunity and the greatest danger in galactic history. Their knowledge could protect peaceful civilizations from future threats, but it could also enable those civilizations to become threats themselves if used without human moral constraints. Walking through the station's garden after submitting his report, Kethvar watched human children play with alien youngsters under the gentle supervision of their parents. The scene looked peaceful and innocent, but he now understood that he was observing the most powerful force in the galaxy, learning to shape its future through conscious choice rather than evolutionary necessity. The children laughed and shared toys while their parents discussed trade agreements and scientific research with alien colleagues. Everything appeared normal and friendly. But Kethvar knew that both generations possessed knowledge and capabilities that could reshape galactic civilization within their lifetimes. In that moment, watching human families integrate into the peaceful community of Haven's Rest, Kethvar finally understood what true power looked like. It looked like choice, conscious and deliberate between creation and destruction, between cooperation and domination, between peace and war. The humans had mastered this choice so completely that they made it look effortless. His final log entry read simply, "Today I learned that the most frightening beings in the universe are not those who cannot choose peace, but those who can choose war at any moment and decide not to. In watching humanity choose peace from a position of overwhelming strength, I have seen the future of galactic civilization, and it will be whatever humans decide it should be."